Hello, good evening. Welcome to Friday Nights Live from the Parrish. My name is Corinne Erni. I'm the Senior Curator of ArtsReach and Special Projects. And I want to welcome everybody who's here in the theater, socially distanced, and all of those watching from home. Thank you so much. And I want to thank our sponsors who make the Friday nights possible. Our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, as well as Sandy and Stephen Pearlbinder. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Scott Bluedorn tonight. He's our Parrish Roadshow artist for this year. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Scott, you're building something quite unique. It's called the Bonac Blind. Can you explain to us what it is, how you're making it, and when we're going to get to see it?
Yeah, so the Bonac Blind is a hand-built barge. And, well, really it's a duck blind, which those of you who are local and some who aren't might know a duck blind as being it's a structure that hunters would actually hide in while they're hunting ducks. And it's part of the local landscape in a lot of different ways. You'll see them in bays and harbors during hunting season. The Bonac Blind, as an idea for me, came from looking at structures like these and also combining that with my interest in small homes, tiny homes, off-grid living, and thinking that it would be really interesting to build or to repurpose a duck blind structure into a small home.
Can you just quickly talk about the name Bonac, what Bonac means, Bonac culture?
So Bonac as a word is referred to as the local people, in particular of the Accabonac Harbor area of East Hampton, which is also the Springs. So Bonacers are native Springs people, but in a larger sense, it kind of refers to a culture of fishing and farming, hunting, and these people who are, and they still are referred to as Bonacers, kind of still live by these ideas. So distinctly, they're a very distinct kind of people, and even have their own accent, which is really interesting. The Bonac accent. Can you
say something in Bonac?
I wish I could, and I can't claim to be a Bonacer myself, although I am a native of East Hampton. But the Bonac accent actually descended from Kent, England, which is really interesting. So the very first English settlers who came here were from that area, and they brought their traditions.
So how far back does that date?
That goes back to the 1630s, 1640s, when the first settlers came here. So those were, they were English people, and their accent still lived on, and some say there's still remnants of that accent today. So that's actually a really interesting thing. That's
really interesting.
Yeah.
So you are from out here, born and raised in East Hampton, and so you're referencing the disappearance of Bonac culture with the Bonac Blind. You're also referencing the lack of affordable housing, as well as climate change, right? I mean, living on the water, living in micro homes.
Yeah.
How did you get that idea? Why now? Why you're building something like that? And how does it all connect for you?
So it's a very, as an idea, as a concept, it's like kind of very intersectional. So it relates to the housing crisis of the Hamptons, which we call this area.
Which I know is very real.
Outrageous affordability for all sorts of working people, younger people can't afford to live here. And in particular, these people from working class areas, which include the Springs and the Bonacers that I refer to. So that's one aspect. And then another aspect is kind of creating a response to climate change and rising seas. So that is where this idea of a floating home might come in, which in theory could float with the tide. And it's a very sustainable, adaptable structure. It's small, it's solar powered, as you can't quite see here, but
what I'm interested in is also the grass that you're covering it with. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the grass itself is all native grass. I was told I couldn't use the large reeds, which you might see in a lot of the harbor areas here.
Who told you that?
The East Hampton trustees. So I've been working closely with the East Hampton trustees who it's funny because as a body, governing body, they go back to that same early 1600s time, and they manage the waterways and beaches on behalf of the public. So I got to work with them, and they say, oh, you can use this, you can't use that. So I can't use Phragmite reeds because they're invasive and they spread like crazy. So it got me thinking, looking at all these other grasses, and I thought this is a really interesting way to also learn about the landscape. So.
And it's really interesting that you are creating an artwork that is labeled as a duck blind, and that's how you got the permit, right? And so East Hampton Town and the trustees worked with you, and I want to give a shout out to them also, and thank them for making this possible, because I know right now it's really difficult to do any kind of art projects anywhere.
Yeah, so I think I'm lucky where this project, it's by nature, it's designed to be outside and in the water, which you will see when it launches on this Sunday. But yeah, it was great to work with the trustees who got me the permit, because it is, in effect, a duck blind. So I got a duck blind permit. So it's getting me thinking, like, if you can launch this structure and it's a permittable structure and you can have it in the water for this amount of time, what does it take then to say, well, okay, I'm not living in it, but like, how does it function as a place to live or work or meditate or just hang out and watch birds? So
it's a perfect example of art imitating life,
exactly,
or life imitating art, right?
Yeah.
Or bringing it both together. So that's Landing Lane in the Springs, where the Bonac Blind will be moored for a week. It's opening up on Sunday. Unfortunately, we're already full, but you can make appointments with Scott all week long to go and see it. So maybe we can, so I just wanted to stay a little bit with this idea of an artist coming up with practical ideas and suggesting solutions to really difficult issues like housing, climate change, and so forth. And the great thing about artists is that they have the freedom to imagine. And I'm also I want to address something that you said in a talk we had back in January, when you said that technology is not the solution. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about your visions and how you could see the Bonac Blind inspiring perhaps architects or urban designers.
Yeah. Oh, well, I have so many ideas about where those two things meet, where art and design and architecture can inform each other. So I really like the idea of natural architecture, and not relying so much on a technologically advanced material or
even though you're using solar panels, that's probably the most technical.
That's probably the most technologically.
I
wouldn't call that advanced. It's an old technology, but
right.
So this thing is made out of wood and native grass and all repurposed objects. So like you'll see a window. Well, there's two windows. One, the big dome, is actually a kid's jungle gym that I found on the side of the road, and I'm outfitting it in plexiglass, and then there's like a plastic salad bowl for a window. So it's as low tech as you can kind of imagine.
How did the geodesic dome come in?
Yeah, I'm just a big fan of geodesic domes, right. And Buckminster Fuller's designs, and actually to me that the dome kind of has always had a utopian kind of you get that idea, like the utopian kind of dream, because that's what Buckminster Fuller was all about mostly. Yes. And so I thought it'd be really cool to integrate that, because the idea is a little bit utopian, where conceptually I'm thinking, if we can't afford to live in a house in the Hamptons, why not live on a floating barge in the harbor where there's no land rights, and you're floating, right? So it's kind of.
So do you hope that might be picked up somehow, this idea?
I mean, I would love to work with, and there are, it's not a totally unique idea, I think, that I've had, where architects are working in a floating dimension. So, there's always been houseboats and barges, and it fits into that world. But why not have modular floating dwellings or floating communities, which do exist also in other parts of the world? I thought would be really interesting to see that here too.
Yeah, and there are lots of bays and inlets here where this could work quite perfectly.
Yeah,
right?
and And it can always move, it can migrate, so.
Right, I know the East Hampton Town trustees are coming on Sunday. Maybe they get some ideas, hopefully.
They do, they have a lot of ideas.
Yeah. I also want to, since we're on that topic, I want to talk about a drawing that you made, which was part of your Artist Choose Artists exhibition this past fall. And it's called Integrated Ocean Energy Farm.
Yeah, right.
And it's where you propose sort of to repurpose the oil drilling platform to produce kelp for many different purposes. Can you talk a little bit about that? And the image will come up when you see Scott's portrait. So
Yeah.
it's the drawing in yellow and blue behind him.
So yeah, that particular idea is playing with kind of existing infrastructures where we have, unfortunately, these oil platforms that are still floating at sea. They're drilling. Deep sea ocean drilling is one of the riskiest things we do currently for a lot of obvious reasons. And this was proposed actually in the 1970s, was to create these large kelp farms. And kelp, if you don't know, it's a type of seaweed. It can be used not only as food, but as biofuel, as fertilizer.
So it's this drawing to the right.
Oh, that's that one there, yeah. And to look at the drawing, you'll see there is actually an oil platform. But what I did was I integrated a couple of different things, including a wind turbine, wave generating arms that actually capture wave energy, and obviously solar arrays, and also the kelp farm. So the idea there is using multiple existing technologies in one compact unit, and it's an energy kind of a farm. So and it's all clean, renewable energy. So to me, that's just a way to look at existing infrastructures and say, how can we really utilize them in a more practical way that might fit different aspects of what we might need and want. So.
Right. Have you taken that idea to manufacturers or to anyone who could be
No, I've
interested?
never taken it to an actual engineer, and I'd be curious to do that because they would point out, oh, well, you can't, solar at sea doesn't work because the spray gets on the panels and it makes them less effective, and the engineering would be impossible for this or that, but that's not what my job as an artist is. I think it's just to think and to propose things and let the engineers kind of work it out if it's going to become a practical kind of a,
Exactly. I mean, that's the freedom of being an artist, and I think that's also the beauty of being an artist.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's interesting in your work. I see a lot of juxtapositions almost of very dreamlike scenarios. You combine a lot of sea creatures or ocean life with the natural world in sort of like almost mythological drawings, and at the same time you're very hands-on, like with things like the Bonac Blind. How do you get to do both of these, or is it a contradiction for you? And can you talk a little bit more about your drawing work?
Yeah, I think the drawing work does come from a place kind of more of pure imagination and more, it's referencing a lot of different things. So I like to hybridize. I think of mixing one thing with an unlike thing and what those kind of possibilities are. And I'm always drawing from the natural world directly, kind of as experience or observation, so you'll see a lot of either if it's animals or sea creatures or
like it
living
looks
things.
Like illustrations.
Yeah,
kind of,
and a lot of it has kind of focused on combining like the living world, organic world with artificiality and what those ideas can be like. And I think that kind of plays into what I do when I hands-on build a structure, which this is the largest thing I've ever built personally, in terms of actually framing and decking and everything that went into this, which is kind of a technical craftsman kind of a thing. But for me, it's really important to draw, which is kind of a visualization from the brain, and then also to build. So I really do like to use my hands because it breaks me out of that two-dimensional box. I wouldn't say I'm and I don't sculpt. I'm not a sculptor, but I do assemble. So a lot of it is assemblage, and I think of this as a really big, large-scale assemblage in a lot of ways.
That's interesting. And the assemblage is a lot of from found material, or
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love found materials. I've always beachcombed, and I still do. But finding things just inspiring the way that the ocean presents them to you has just always been really interesting to me.
You said you found some of these?
Yeah, a lot of these things are found. So right, yeah.
It's a great way to repurpose.
I even found that little boat cleat that's down there. I just found that,
On a beach?
in the harbor, and I was like, well,
really?
I'm going to use this just for what it's for. But like, that's a salad bowl, so.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And there's a lot of found wood too. I think those two are found, but a lot of it's also new plywood, which.
How did you get the solar panels?
Those I think I just got at a yard sale, with the idea that I was gonna power something with them. So I think I got them a couple years ago, and it's like I'll hold on to something for a while.
So what is it powering inside the?
It'll be powering lights mostly,
Okay.
and it could handle a small hot plate. So I'll have that, and it's it'll be it goes to a small power bank. So it's just enough power to, and then you realize how much power you really need to kind of get by. Where it's not going to power a TV or like a microwave or something, and you realize, well, you don't need those things. So.
Not really.
Yeah.
You have come up with a term called Maritime Cosmology, and I think it's a beautiful term, and I see it in your work, in your drawings. Combining the ocean and the cosmos. They're separate, but they both harbor secrets of our life. How did you come up with that term?
Yeah, it is kind of a poetic term, and it's kind of abstract, but to me, it kind of shows a parallel between outer space and the deep sea. But it doesn't have to be, it can be closer to home too. It can be just the ocean in general. It's played such a huge part in human history and even evolution. I think we all started from this, we all started as fish walking out of the water, and in some ways we still are like that. It's played like this, it's kind of like an unseen hand in history too, in terms of transportation and the way
and it's very important out here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You grew up with that.
This place particularly is more of a land of water than of land. It's not continental. It's like kind of between two worlds. Yes. It's like margins.
Well, we are between two waters. We're between the ocean and the bay, and there's very, very little land in between, actually.
Yeah.
So.
And I grew up by the beach, so it's just always been. It's an interface too. It's about where the land meets the water, and those two worlds. It's like an interface. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wanted to actually ask you about this Moran's turtle. Where did you get that idea from?
The Moran house is actually an existing house in East Hampton. It was the studio of the artist Thomas Moran, who was the first artist to come here, a major artist, and establish his studio. And it's a really interesting house. And the sea turtle is just this very kind of, to me, a magical being. So combining the two, I've done a couple things where I've combined architecture, especially interesting looking architecture with an organic form.
Right.
Yeah.
And since we're going through these, Plum Island where is that
located? So Plum Island is one of the outer islands off of the North Fork, and it's forbidden. That's why it's from the Forbidden Island Project. You can't go there as a member of the public.
But you did.
I actually I haven't. I've been just offshore.
Okay.
So that was from a couple of different references, but actually it's great because I've been working with a group that is actually aiming to preserve Plum Island and open it up to the public because the government actually wants to auction the island because they own it. And that's still the idea. That's still the idea. Yeah, is to auction to the highest bidder. So, but at least the planned sale has been put off for another year, thankfully.
So you do get involved in these kind of political issues or
yeah, definitely. Something like that I think is
here.
Probably one of the most important things we can do out here.
Right.
Because it's it's much better preserved than many other environments here because it's been essentially closed to the public for about 100
Right.
years, I think. So.
Right. Wow. Solitude, I think, comments on, I would say, climate change. But,
It does, yeah, in a way. And this was, in a way, taken from life when there was actually icebergs floating down. That was in Gardiner's Bay, in 2018.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So out here?
Yeah, so that was inspired by a true story, yeah.
So there was ice floating?
Yeah, so it's funny. We've had a lot of cold winters and recently a lot of warm winters, but I think 2018 was a pretty cold year.
I remember that, and
we
I
did
saw
have chunks
frozen
of ice.
chunks on the
Yeah.
ocean. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that was towards later, early spring when it just started to break up, and you could actually stand on them. So.
Wow.
But it does reference climate change, of course, because,
The image we just saw, the catch, the empty building with, I guess, a dead whale wrapped over
Shark,
it.
yeah.
Shark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's about bycatch, and which is a huge problem in the fishing industry, where they go after target species that's marketable, and then they end up with just unbelievable amounts of dead fish that they can't sell, so they're just thrown back or turned. They're very rarely kept, so that's.
Is that happening out here too?
All the time, yeah. Unfortunately.
I remember all the dead fish floating in the canal. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Do you know what that was?
Yeah, well, that's a
that was?
fish kill, so that's
kill,
either, I mean, there's a number of reasons that they can say that either it's a lack of oxygen in the water, and that's usually what it is, which comes from nitrogen pollution, lack of oxygen. It's an anoxic environment, so.
And nitrogen comes from the what they
fertilizers.
put on the fertilizers on the lawn, right?
So, and we have a lot of water problems out here, unfortunately, so.
Yeah.
Pesticides, over-fertilizing your lawn, very bad idea.
Any thoughts on or explanations about Genesis Flux?
Yeah, this piece was in the Parrish last year, was the Artist Choose Artist show. So I thought I would do kind of a monumental drawing that kind of shows, well, it's really about how we have no idea what our climactic future entails, because it's kind of uncharted territory. We have this idea that, okay, we have a warmer world, but we also, some places are cooler and wetter, and sometimes that creates niches for animals, some animals to thrive and others to become extinct. That's a blue whale skeleton, which is clearly dead, but it's generating new life, and there's dead trees coming out of it. So it's a flux because, well, Genesis flux, it's like creation in flux. It can go both ways, really in unexpected kind of territory. So.
Right, and I that's what I see a lot in your work is even though you can tell, the effects of climate change or overfishing and things like that, but there's always a sign of hope. And I remember when we had our conversation here in January, you were the youngest participant, and you were the most hopeful one. So I'm kind of curious what gives you hope today.
Well, it's complicated because in light of what's going on in the world and where the trajectory seems to be going, it can be easy to have like a really bleak outlook. But that being said, I think that we're reaching a paradigm shift where people have finally realized, either they're forced to through devastation like wildfires or over acidified water, that they have to change out of necessity. So that's one pushing element. And then the other is just the idea that we know we're on a finite planet with finite resources, and that a conservation kind of has to be the only way we're going to survive as a species. To me, that's always been obvious, but I think in a larger world, I think it's a collective consciousness has to find that as a guiding source for policy, for the way we live our lives, how all industries have to change if they're going to survive. So I do have a lot of hope in the fact that younger generations, I think, know this like at their core. And I don't want to say it's too late for the older generations, but they've lived their life in such a way that maybe it hasn't been obvious to them. So
I have that hope too, and hopefully in a month or so we'll have better policies.
Yeah, I can only hope, right?
Scott, how has COVID-19 affected your life? career, your life, your work?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, just being forced to kind of settle in one place, and I travel a lot, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So it's been hard not to travel, and you know, it's really hard that people can't come together. You know.
With a few exceptions.
Yeah, with a few exceptions, or you know,
very limited. Yeah.
Or you do the best you can and stay safe. But I think for me, as an artist, like I'm used to working by myself, so for me it hasn't changed in that all that dramatically because I do like thrive in kind of semi-solitude. But for me, it's a lack of traveling and being able to gather and you know.
Yeah.
All sorts of things like that, I guess.
For sure. Has it affected planned exhibitions or?
Yeah, fortunately not. I guess not so much, which is good because, you know, I've been focusing on creating new things and trying new directions.
What have you been working on?
A lot of, well, I'd say design. You know, like, and this kind of fits into more of a design world, but even playing with kelp seaweed as making lamps and playing with the translucent effects of light through seaweed, I think is really interesting. I've been working on things like that and still drawing and painting, but also creating a lot of smaller works that kind of might lead to other things. So that's kind of, I'll usually make something, and then if it interests me, I might find a direction in it and create a series based on that. So sometimes it takes unexpected kind of directions.
That's what making art is all about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I never trap myself in one box. I've never drawn myself into a corner.
Right.
No pun intended, but.
I also wanted to ask you what kind of artists have influenced you?
Yeah,
Magritte comes to mind with your drawings.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of historical artists. I love surrealism and the entire surrealist kind of canon, but also a lot of contemporary painters. I like Neo Rausch a lot, and I like a lot of illustrators actually, because I'm actually a trained illustrator, but but I also like a lot of architects and designers. So what's happening in that world too, and there's just like too many to name, honestly. But and I'm also really into the idea of biodesign and designing with nature and for nature, and using new kind of new fields of thought. So, and that includes mushrooms, and mycology is this greatly expanding field. So that's been really interesting to follow, and I like a lot of the scientists working with that, and now they're creating, you know, applications for using. So
how can you use mushrooms, or what is your involvement in that?
You can actually create molds to create pieces for fabricating furniture or even objects. Yeah, because it's a growing substrate, which is really interesting.
Right.
So to me, that's been really cool. And also, yeah, even designing things like I designed a worm farm because I'm a worm farmer. Like that's just another, I think, direction, but like it does always play back into what I do as an artist, because if I design something, I'm thinking very practically and, left-minded, right? So.
Yeah, it's again that balance and that combination that I see a lot in your work.
Yeah,
but, you know,
and I can just flip over
very
to the
utopian
right
and very
brain
practical at the same time.
Right.
It's very unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, design is definitely creeping in more and more.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great. What is a dream project of yours?
This might be one of them. The Bonac Blind has been an idea that I was like, how do I draw all these different interests together? And it's a good example, and you know, I think in terms of it's certainly like the largest thing I've done as like it's an installation, but it's also a living kind of organism. That's how I see it, because I think it's going to change, and I'm going to add to it, and I have a lot of plans too for how it can.
Well, I was also kind of amazed how quickly you built it. I mean, we kept talking because we didn't know if we could do this show or not, and then it kind of came together very, very quickly in the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it did come together quickly, and I'm thankful for that. So I think it's not kind of, this isn't the end for this actual project. I actually plan, or I have a number of ideas where it could become either a permanent installation, which could include a library, a museum, a place to meditate, a place to just view nature. It's one of the interesting things that it has this window. Another idea is, and I'm going to hope to make this possible, is turn into a camera obscura, which, if anyone knows what that is, you have a lens and you can turn a room into an actual, well, camera where it will project light in and you can see an image. It's usually flipped upside down, but that's another kind of future idea.
I like that idea of multi-usage.
Yeah, I do too, and I think I build that into a lot. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Scott, thank you so much. I want to open this up to questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Your slides there, curious to know what that is. I don't know if they can flip through the slides. It almost looks like a chip, like a computer chip.
So the question is, he's curious about one of the images. It looks like a computer chip, but I think it
might be
the window.
It might be the detail of the window that's actually in the Bonac Blind. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because it's a piece that I think I made in 2011. So it's an older piece, and it's actually all found objects that all kind of have like a grid or a net component. So there's fishing net and lobster traps, and I place them all together, and then it's with poured resin. So
This one.
Yeah. So that's poured resin, and they're all found objects from beaches. So, and I thought it would be a really great window.
What can you give us a size?
Yeah, and it glows really nicely with light behind it. So, yeah.
I take it that you've seen the movie Waterworld.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess you're preparing for that?
Yeah.
The movie
Let's hope.
Waterworld?
Waterworld.
Waterworld.
It's a classic.
Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
Yes.
So your blind is used not for hunting, obviously. Okay, but it would be a great photographic blind.
Exactly. Yeah.
Photograph waterfowl.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of one additional idea where I'm not a hunter and not a fisherman, but I like to really, watch, observe, and.
So the suggestion was to use it as a
photographic blind.
photographic blind.
Yeah,
I'm just repeating it so people who are watching us online can hear it.
Yeah, you can definitely. That's definitely something that it can be used for. Yeah.
So where's the opening for the cameras?
Well, you could always be either on the deck. There's a front deck, as you'll see. And the window, the large window, is quite big. So, and there's also the back where the window is a hatch that opens. So there's actually a lot of. Yeah, you can peek out. There's even a hatch in the bottom that's removable that is for looking into the water. So that's another fun element. So in theory, you could clam or scallop from inside the blind itself if you have a look box, which is a viewing device for, baymen will use it to look underwater for clams or scallops. So it's another built-in fun aspect. Well, that's another idea.
The question is if he's planning to move into this.
It's another idea that I thought it could potentially become my studio, because I am always, unfortunately, having to move my studio. It's housing insecure as well. So if I say, hey, I built my own studio and now no one can get me out of here and I'll stay. And yeah, could have my own residency, yeah.
Just do it yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last point that I'd like to help you out on in being involved in the offshore sailing communities. Somebody mentioned to you that solar panels would not be effective at sea, and we use them on offshore sailboats all the time. So don't let that discourage you.
Oh, good, yeah. Uh-huh.
We mentioned that they say the panels get spray on them.
Yeah.
Isn't effective.
Yeah, that was always my understanding.
So the question is about solar panels and the effectiveness of solar panels.
I think the issue might have been with like a large solar array. If you can imagine a solar array at sea, there might be a lot of complications. But that's one of those things that the naysayers will always find some problem to kind of reject renewable energy as an idea. So, and I think all these things can be engineered. So,
Chris? Or,
I defer.
yeah. Okay.
I'm just curious where you're going to put it, and if you are thinking you're going to move it around or keep it in one place.
Where are you going to put it? Are you going to move it around?
Yeah, it's kind of open-ended right now. The plan is, I think that we might have it at the Parrish for a while after it's in the water.
That's
and
in the
then
works.
for a longer term, it's kind of still up in the air. So I'm fielding all sorts of ideas, or if anyone has a dock or somewhere interesting that it could live more long term, I'm certainly open to that.
It would be wonderful. I think it should live on.
Yeah.
Chris?
Scott, thanks so much. I'm curious about your kind of movement to building, right? So I'm familiar with your work as a watercolor drawing, which, by the way, is exceptional.
Oh, thank you.
And I think the conceptual power in it is self-evident. But I'm just curious, do you have like exposure in your background to builders?
Yeah.
How do you kind of drift towards that?
Well, it's
Question
funny.
is about if he has a background as builder.
Yeah, I don't. I've never been formally trained, and it's actually, I would say this was purely intuitive building. And it's interesting, I just read a book by actually a local author called Tower. His name is Bill Henderson, where he built a tower in Maine with very limited kind of building background experience, but he called it intuitive, where he would, you know basics about how to frame and structure and how to make sure it's safe, and then it's kind of up to you to make sure that you engineer it correctly. So I've never been formally trained, although I do have, in my family, we have architects, we have landscape architects, carpenters, so maybe it's genetic in some way. But yeah, for me, it's always been, I learned this thing and I learned that thing. I learned how to do this and the best practice. And it's interesting what you can do intuitively as long as you make sure that it's safe. So.
So did you build a lot of tree forts when you were
Yeah, not personally, no. I think I was involved in helping construct them. I remember building a treehouse platform, at least with my dad, but not. And I did build my own loft in Brooklyn, where we had free reign to. It's one of those warehouses where there seemed to be no rules, no supers, no. So I framed my entire room and ended up with this amazing fragment of a Chinese house that was given to me, and I built that into the room, and then built the room around it,
So again, you took something you found that was given to you.
Is right. It's a
you
found
made
object.
it work.
That's funny. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I want to thank Scott for coming. Oh, one more question. Yeah. So someone just called him the New Age Leonardo, and
Thanks, that's very kind.
suggesting to reach out to libraries. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, thank you. Okay, the very last question, and then,
What's your take on the commercialization of your work? We were involved in that Green Corporate project, and that's like a lot of really great exposure for you. So I just didn't know if you had been doing anything more like that since, or what is your opinion or feeling on that?
so this is a question about the commercialization of Scott's work.
So I am a trained illustrator. That's what I studied, and I have always drawn. So for me, I draw less of a distinction between if I am going to make a work for myself, which I almost always do anyway, even if I'm approached by, say, a company that wants to do an illustration for something or a packaging illustration. Fortunately, I get to kind of create my own ideas, and sometimes they just fit it into that box. And I think that's the best marriage of the two. Because I render and I draw, and that's always been like my foundation. So if I was an abstract artist, I don't think I could do what I do necessarily. as an illustrator, but I don't have a problem with using it, my work for various outlets like that. In fact, you'll see in the Bonac Blind, I created a repeat pattern, which can be used for any number of things where a repeat pattern is essentially a surface, so it can be applied as wallpaper or gift paper or something like that. So yeah, it's funny. It is how I make part of my living, so yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you all for coming. Sunday is full, unfortunately, but Scott can show you the Bonac throughout the week. You can make reservations on our website, parrishart.org. And I also want to thank our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, and Sandy and Stephen Pearlbinder. Thank you.